Hello and welcome to Big Band Exchange. We will begin momentarily, but as you can see, I'm here in our beloved Mel Lastman Square in Toronto, and I'm thrilled to introduce to you this new, exciting online program. I'm Danielle Ongera with Cinemascape, an award-winning arts and film company here in North York, and I'm here with my partner.
Hello, I'm Simeon Taule. For the past 25 summers, big bands have been filling this square with the sounds of swing. And big bands have enticed hundreds of people to dance and enjoy time together every Sunday evening. We had a great time last year, and we're so looking forward to seeing you this summer. Even though right now we can't meet in person, we can still celebrate the joy of music.
That's right, in this Big Band Exchange, we are celebrating music by connecting, sharing our love of music, telling stories, exchanging information, and of course, playing our favorite tunes. We wouldn't be here today, or you there, without North York Arts. North York Arts is an arts service organization that collaborates with artists and organizations to promote arts programming in North York.
This series features 4 favorite big bands that would have played live right here on this very stage this summer. The members of these unique bands have reached out to music lovers across Toronto and exchanged musical ideas, anecdotes, and memories. Now you have a chance to enjoy it all as they swap the stage for our favorite medium, the screen. Of course, we have one last important point to recognize before the Big Band Exchange begins.
Please let us recognize and acknowledge that each of us is joining from different parts of Turtle Island, and Indigenous people have been here since time immemorial. This specific land here in North York is covered by Treaty 13. It is the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, the Haudenosaunee, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. We are truly grateful to live and create on this land. We wish to thank generations who have cared for the land before, those who continue to, and be knowledge keepers of this land today. North York Arts recognizes that this land acknowledgement is part of a continuous process towards truth and reconciliation. We also acknowledge that we're in a time where systemic racism continues to be enacted on both the Indigenous and Black communities. But by adhering to North York Arts values, we will lead with authenticity, and we remain committed to building positive relationships with Indigenous people, Black communities, and the many other communities who also face systemic racism, other forms of oppression and marginalization. We remain committed to building positive relationships with the wider community and the environment. We thank you, and thank you for acknowledging this time with us today.
We are about to hand it over to the band. I don't know about you, but I feel the excitement of the event about to start. From all of us to all of you, take care, be safe, and enjoy the Big Band Exchange.
Hi everybody, thanks so much for tuning in. My name is Jenna Marie Pinard and I am so excited to present to you this very special vodcast for North York Arts. My band and I were so excited to perform for you live at the Sunday Serenade series at Mel Lastman Square. Unfortunately, that won't be able to happen, but I hope that you enjoy this presentation and hopefully we can perform for you soon. When organizing the blueprints for this vodcast, I decided that I wanted to do something a little bit different. Instead of performing for you virtually, I wanted to open up the space to have important conversations about jazz, jazz community, the past, and the future. I had the honor of interviewing 3 very special guests, collaborators, peers, and friends of mine, Travis Knights, Anthony D'Alessandro, and Leighton Harrell, but we'll talk about them in a second. If you'd like to hear me perform or check out my new album, you can do so by following me on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube at Jenna Marie Official, or you can check out my website, www.jennamarieofficial.com.
Here we are, out of cigarettes, holding hands and yawning. Look how late it gets to sleepy people by dawn's early light. Too much in love to say goodnight. Well, here we are in the cozy chair, picking on a wishbone from the frigid air. Two sleepy people with nothing to say, and too much in love to break away.
2020 has been extremely challenging. With the devastating rise of COVID-19 all over the world, we have been forced to self-isolate and to socially distance. As a result, the arts and music communities have been put on hold. This virus has forced us all to rethink, reevaluate, and discuss what our communities look like and what we want them to look like in the future. Things got even more serious in 2020 when the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor were exposed to the world. With the Black Lives Matter movement at the forefront for change, how do we as a community make sure that we are really investigating and digging deep into our history's past, our present, and again, our future? Lastly, we have the This Is Art School movement, hashtag This Is Art School, a group of current students, faculty, and alumni who are demanding change in post-secondary jazz institutions and demanding safe spaces, inclusivity, and anti-racist action. All of this has sparked necessary conversation within the jazz and arts communities at large. It has inspired me to do some deep digging within myself. I know that I have a lot to learn, and I have even more to unlearn. And I invite you to join us in these conversations and start a conversation with your friends, your family, or in the comments of this video. There is no doubt that jazz comes from the genius and the brilliance of Black African Americans, and that this music is rooted in oppression, resilience, and celebration. Today you'll be hearing snippets from conversations that I got to have with pianist Anthony D'Alessandro, bassist Leighton Harrell, and tap dancer Travis Knights. We're going to be showing you snippets of these interviews in today's video, but if you'd like to watch them and listen to them in full, please feel free to click the links that we've provided below. It's really worth checking out. There's some really important stuff in there. For now, I present to you a vodcast about jazz tradition, culture, and study, about our communities presently, the past, and where we all see jazz going in the future. I really hope you enjoy. First up, here's a snippet from the conversation that I got to have with tap dancer extraordinaire Travis Knights. Travis Knights is a tap dancer. Born in Montreal, Canada, Travis was introduced to the rich oral tradition of tap by his teacher Ethel Bruno at age 10. He went on to travel the world, spreading his love of rhythm across 4 continents, touring with Tap Dogs, Tapestry Dance Company, and self-produced Tap Love Tour. In 2019, Travis finished a 2-year community development residency at the Transit Club in Toronto, hosting the Jazz United Jam, a weekly jazz jam session aimed at reconnecting live musicians with dancers. He is the 2020 recipient of the Jacqueline Namur Prize for Outstanding Contribution to Dance in Canada. In April 2021, Travis will debut his one-man show called Ephemeral Artifacts with a 3-week residency at Theatre Passe Muraille in Toronto. He currently lives in Brampton, Ontario, and hosts a Tap Love Tour podcast available on Spotify, SoundCloud, and Apple Podcasts, featuring interviews of a myriad of inspiring tap dance artists.
If you go to any country that has a rich history and a relatively homogenous people, I say relatively, I'm thinking about Ireland, I'm thinking about Spain, I'm thinking about Peru, I'm thinking anywhere. You have folk culture, folklore, folk dance, folk music, folk, folk art. Basically, when I say folk, I mean something cultural that delivers the history and the stories and the values of a people. And it's brought forward through time and preserved and upheld and respected and revered. I mentioned Peru, they have something called Afro-Peruvian Zapateo. Ireland, Irish step dance, English clogging, Spanish flamenco. These are all foot-based percussive dances. Tap dance is no different. Tap dance, where tap dance suffers, is from the racist history of the United States. So if we go back to the 1840s, tap dance starts with a dude named, this is not necessarily where it starts, but this is the first person that got famous for it. His name is William Henry Lane, otherwise known as Master Juba. So he's, I think, like 16 years old at the time and busking in the 5 points of New York City. And he's dancing for money, dancing for food. He had this incredible talent of being able to imitate the dancers in these minstrel shows. He had an incredible talent of being able to imitate white dancers in minstrel shows, white dancers that were painting their face black in order to pretend to be black. Now, depending on the age that we're talking about in the minstrel shows, you have like varying degrees of ridicule, varying degrees of poking fun at, varying degrees of this weird, truly weird exchange. And this deserves more time. But previous to the American Civil War, that's when minstrel shows start. And the performers would go to the plantations and study black folk and see what they would do to entertain themselves, to have fun, to engage in their spirit outside of the drudgery and horror and torture of their lives. And they would take that and put it on stage, black it up and put it on stage. And these were minstrel shows. And because of that practice, those minstrel shows were authentic. After the Civil War, there's that kind of access isn't possible anymore. The slaves are now free and building up their own communities, their own cultures. They're basically rebuilding their sense of history and sense of selves, because the history is gone, the languages are gone, the religions are gone, so they're regaining their sense of selves at this time. There's also a deep resentment that happens after the Civil War, after the deaths of so many people. There's a resentment between black folk and white folks, Southern white folks. It depends on who you are. And so minstrel shows after the Civil War were a lot more mean, right? Mean-spirited. I would say less authentic, because you're not necessarily going anymore and engaging with black people. You are engaging with the stereotypes from the shows of yesterday. And so those acts became a lot more wooden, a lot more inauthentic. And so at that time, William Henry Lane had this amazing ability to imitate them. And so he'd be hired on minstrel shows to imitate dancers that were out sick, that maybe died, that maybe quit. And he had a career doing that. But then he'd go to the pubs.
He had a career imitating white folks who were
imitating black folks.
Imitating black folks. Wow. Okay. Wow. Okay. That's a trip. Yeah.
That's a trip. So yeah, he had an amazing ability to do that. But what he got famous for was his authentic approach to dance, which is now known as tap dance. So this relationship, this give and take, this distance between these two characters, white people and black people, and I say it like that because it's an invention. The whiteness It's an invention.
Yeah.
Anyway, this, it's like this spy versus spy relationship that's occurred. After the Civil War, you have the period of Reconstruction, and then it goes into, things go really, really poorly after Reconstruction. When certain people get elected, you have laws, segregation laws, otherwise known as Jim Crow laws.
Yeah.
Jim Crow was a famous minstrel song created by Thomas Rice. Jumping Jim Crow. It was very famous, very popular, and so popular that it got branded as the title of segregation, American segregation, Jim Crow segregation. Which means that during this time you had white people on this side, you had black people on this side. Now, what's happening on black people are on this side? They're, as I said before, creating their own culture. Jazz starts in New Orleans, moves up to Chicago, moves up to New York City. As it moves up to New York City, you have this, what's happening at that time is something called the Harlem Renaissance. And you had this explosion of culture. These authors were writing about the Black experience, and it's like the beginning of Afrofuturism, Afro-present, Afro-future. You had singers expressing themselves, dancers expressing themselves, musicians expressing themselves, and all in this soup of the gumbo. It's a time. Perhaps I'm romanticizing it, but it's an ideal. Like if I had a time machine, that's where I'd want to go. I'd want to go and see this I guess this moment of catalyst where American culture explodes in this specific community of hyper marginalized, segregated people off to the sides over here. So while this brilliance is happening, while this music is being developed, while this culture is being developed, the white people on this side were allowed to come to this side and party. There were places like the Savoy Ballroom where you have authentic jazz dance, like Lindy Hop, solo jazz happening with these big bands. The sound, it's the kids are going crazy. They're loving it. They're enjoying their lives. They're dancing to the devil music, and they're bringing this flavor back into their own communities. But they're bringing it back into their own communities without a context without really being a part of this community, without respecting this community. And that's what we're talking about. It's about respect. And so you have these people that are bringing it back to their communities. And it's amazing. It's incredible. Of course it's incredible because it comes from this cauldron of awesome. And so, yeah, it's alive. It's amazing. And so this gets on Broadway. This gets into Hollywood. And oftentimes you had people like Fred Astaire, you had Eleanor Powell, fantastic dancer. She would come to Harlem. They would come to Harlem and learn from Charlie Atkins or John Bubbles, for example. I know that Charlie in his book, hold on, where's that book? This is a great one. This is cool. It's called Class Act. It's all about Charlie Atkins, really rich, deeply complex. Oh. But he talks about, being flown to Los Angeles to just teach so-and-so some dance moves. And then those dance moves would get into movies or get onto Broadway with no credit to the choreographer. Wow. And so this relationship that started in minstrelsy continues and it continues and it continues and it continues to this day, to where before this moment, this revolutionary moment, I did a podcast called Race and Tap Dance, and I'm this guy. I'm like, they call it shit disturber. I tend to do that.
Or curious, truth seeker,
Yeah, yeah, sure. But I know me. Like I came at it with this particular perspective.
Okay,
because,
I see.
As a dancer, I've been dancing for a long time, and in the productions that I've been in, I've noticed that they are segregated. I've noticed that there's black tap dance and there's white tap dance. And if you want to code the language, you can say Broadway tap dance and rhythm tap dance. It's just coded language. Black tap dance, white tap dance. Okay. And so in a lot of these productions, I noticed that I'm either the only black guy or among a bunch of black people. And so the question has been, it had been bubbling in my mind. And through the podcast, I had the opportunity to ask the question to elders that I love and respect, to young people that I love and respect. Hey, is tap dance segregated? And overwhelmingly, in fact, everyone answered yes.
Wow.
And I did that podcast like 2 years ago. And so now, in this moment of revolution, you have a bunch of people waking up, and it's happening in all across our society, which it makes me really joyful and deeply sad that we're in 2020 and it's still like the ghosts are still here, and it's like what the journey that's taken us, that's brought us to this point is so awful, it is unacceptable to go back or to rest on status quo or no. I know that I have my own work to do, and I promise I'm doing it. I promise. But so does everybody else. Revolution only happens for those who participate. Yeah.
How do you see the future of tap dance? And if you could create, a future in tap dance, what that would look like in our communities in Canada, with jazz musicians, without, like, what would that look like? What would you want to strive towards? What do you think we should be working towards?
So for me, I think the future, okay, before I go hard, because I'm still hyper emotional, but hey, I think the future's bright. Actually do think the future's bright. What I hope to see for tap dance is a commitment to the culture of it. And by the culture of it, I mean a commitment to connecting to musicians, a commitment to, like, the audience. That's great. That's all wonderful. But I feel like audience for a tap dancer, I think that audience is distracting. I feel like we're so conditioned to perform. But if we understood that the performance of tap dance stems from minstrel days, if we understood that, then out of sheer, like, we'd go this other direction. And I didn't get to this thought process alone. I've had mentors, specifically Heather Cornell.
She's great.
She's fantastic. She didn't tell me to do this, but she told me her commitment, and it made me go, oh my gosh. But to never go on stage and press play. What are you doing? You're a tap dancer. Go on stage, either do you, or do what we're supposed to do, which is be in connection, be in collaboration with music and musicians, engage in the act of being, And from this place, you're no longer concerned about the trick step, because the trick step is for them. You're concerned about being in the pocket. You're just doing what's right for that moment, to be in connection and collaboration in like a kind of communion with the musicians. And then I noticed when it's happened, rarely, but when it happened at the Jazz United Jam, it was like everything disappeared. It was like a spirit entered the room. It's bigger than entertainment for money. Get out of here. It's bigger than the market. It's bigger than economy. It's human. It's nature. it's unsayable. That's why we do the music. It's unsayable. It's a feeling that's conjured. And I think that a part of this revolution, a part of people actively searching for the history, actively trying to be on the side of anti-racist, and meaning like with whatever you choose to do, you're welcome. You're welcome to tap dance. You're welcome to jazz. You're welcome to hip hop. You're welcome to rock or whatever. But as if you do it, then do it. Wait, if you do it, then do it. Don't just, and I think that's my hope for the dance. I know that there will always be levels of engagement to everyone that puts on a pair of tap shoes, to be specific to tap dance. There will always be levels of engagement. That's fine. But I'm confident that a critical mass, and by critical mass, I could be just talking about 5 people. My life was changed by one person, Gregory Hines. But I'm confident that a critical mass of people will inspire a different relationship to the dance. And it's weird, like this time of COVID, the opposite is happening. We're all being strongly legislatively encouraged to stay at home, physically distance, put on your mask. It's just like, there's this thing. My kids are like 4 and 3. They're being raised in this COVID, and to see them when we go on our walks, to see them recoil when, like, my heart breaks when a person walks by, to see them recoil. There's like a weird byproduct, a cultural byproduct of this time that we're going to see when it's all said and done. Fine. But I think the answer to that is the music. I feel like I don't know who said it, the absence makes the heart grow fonder. I miss you, Jen. I'm serious.
I miss you too.
Big old thing.
So much.
But I think that means when the reunion happens, it's going to be so live, and we're going to be, at least for a short time, because we'll regress back to feeling like everything's normal. But for a short time, there will be this elation that I think it'll be in all of our best interest to remember. That elation of being able to be together and not taking ourselves or each other for granted.
Travis and I had so much to talk about, so if you'd like to check out the conversation in full, please do so by clicking the links provided. Next up, you're going to hear a snippet from my conversation with pianist Anthony D'Alessandro. You're going to be hearing all about Anthony's very special jazz study and practice. Anthony D'Alessandro is a pianist, composer, arranger, and band leader based in Toronto, Ontario. His passion for the blues, gospel, and traditional jazz has shaped his distinctively joyful and captivating style of playing. Anthony holds a Bachelor of Music degree in jazz piano performance from the University of Toronto, where he studied under Canadian jazz luminaries Steve Wallace, David Braid, Dave Young, Mark Eisenman, David Restivo, and Mike Murley. Speaking about curiosity and kind of, music and your study, I know because, we have a lot of deep discussions about music, you and I, on a personal level and on a professional level. Yeah. And something that I know about you specifically is that you are doing a very interesting study at the moment, and that over COVID isolation, you've been tackling a very interested project. So I'm curious, in layman's terms, can you tell our audience about your practice, what you've been working on, and why?
Yeah, so I think what you're referring to is I'm right now I'm just trying to learn more songs, learn more repertoire, as we say, tunes. And I'll admit, this did start before COVID. And it started because I would always hear stories, and I started hanging out with these musicians, these musicians in Toronto, you'd be playing with them and you're like, hey, do you know this tune? And they're like, yeah. Do you know this tune? Yeah. Okay. And then you try to stump them. Like, you think of the most obscure song, do you know this tune? And they got it. They know every song. I mean, Steve Wallace comes to mind as one.
I knew you were thinking about Steve Wallace.
Yeah, of course. So Steve Wallace, for those who don't know, is a great Canadian, great jazz bass player who is really, really part of Canadian jazz history. He knows so many songs, and I'm sure if I asked Steve, he would say, I don't know so many songs. Don Thompson knows way more songs than me. And I've never spoken to Don, but I'm sure if you asked Don, he would probably say, oh, I don't know half as many songs as Ray Brown did. Right.
And just to interrupt briefly here, just for our audience listening, when we're referring to people knowing songs, we don't actually just mean that they've heard the song and know of the song. Mm-hmm. What Anthony's talking about is that Steve and these folks can fully play those songs by memory.
They play them by memory. They can play them in all 12 keys. They can sing you the melody. They can talk you through all the chords. Like, they really know them. So I kind of decided that if I want to call myself a jazz piano player, which I proudly do, I think it's my duty to go through these songs and to try my best to learn as many as I can, right? And to learn them the right way. Because I think early on I spent a lot of time learning songs the wrong way. There's this thing called the Real Book, and what this is it is a publishing company that published these books that kind of put sheet music to all these songs and doesn't always get them right, and beyond that, even if it does get it right, it's hard to get that ingrained in some deep memory. So I kind of changed my whole approach to learning songs, and have been doing this over the pandemic. Is I actually start with the lyrics. Because as a chordal player, I find I usually, the melody would be the thing that would go first. I could still play through the chord changes, but I'm usually not playing the melody because I'm accompanying someone who's playing the melody. So the melody would go. So I said, to rectify this, I am going to get out a pen and paper. I want to learn a new song. This is my process. I look it up on Wikipedia, and I just read the brief history of the song, who wrote it, what year was published. Most of these songs were published in 1931 or 1929 or around that era. And I look at the very first recording of the song, who recorded it, and then I look who made it famous, because those are often not the same. I then go to that very first recording, and these things usually would come from like Broadway musicals at the time that Cole Porter would write for, or alternatively, they would come from early, like old-timey movies. So I'd go on YouTube and I'll look this up, and I'll get out my pen and paper, lined paper, so not staff paper, but just lined paper, and I'll just write out the lyrics, like as if I'm writing out a poem, and I write it down top to bottom. And the fun part is I get to like watch these bizarre clips from all these old timey movies featuring like Bing Crosby and like, these, and the acting's different, and the things they talk about is different. And it's really like you're diving into like the 1930s again. It's really crazy. Or the 1950s, or whenever the movie came out, the 40s. So I write out all the lyrics, and then on the same recording, the same first recording, I'll write out the melody on top of the lyrics in the form of numbers. That's kind of a musical thing, but basic idea is I'm associating the melody with those lyrics, and then I just look up every version I can of the song, and I just go through maybe 5 or 10 versions of it, and I check how every musician sings that melody. And often they don't sing it the same as the very first recording of it. And then you kind of have to just do a discussion with yourself. Okay, am I going to go with the very first recording, or what 90% of the people are playing? And eventually through that process, I found I've always managed to find the true melody, So then once I have that melody, I play it in all 12 keys with the music, and then I'll take away the music, play it in all 12 keys again. And then once I feel like I've really learned the melody and I've sang through all the lyrics, then I do the same thing with the chord changes of the song. I go to the very first recording, find out all the original chord changes, and then look up all the endless possibilities of alternate changes, which as a piano player, I love like finding these alternate changes and having all these like flow charts on my paper of which chord's going where. So I grab all those changes. Hank Jones always has lots of great stuff. Bill Evans always has like the coolest alternate changes for everything. Fred Hirsch too. And then I practice that in 12 keys. Then I put both together and I practice the melody and the chord changes in 12 keys. And by then I've played the song so many times, and this is probably happens over the span of a week. I'm like, I know the song, and it kind of sticks, you know, it doesn't really fade away. When I learn songs this way, they really do stick. And I will credit this, with all respect, I will credit this process to David Braid, who I love. You know, he was the guy who told me, he's like, this is the way you got to do it. If you want them to stick, you have to do it this way. And he's a great composer and piano player in Canada and Toronto. He lives in Toronto, but he's performed far beyond that. Anyway, so that's kind of what I've been doing for learning tunes. And
so what's interesting about what you're saying is that the jazz standards as we hear them today, or not even as contemporary as today, like even, you know, maybe in the past 20, 40 years or something, when you're doing a study and you're hearing somebody play the melody or singing it, and you hear that something has happened in this history where the melody all of a sudden is no longer what was originally written, and everyone is picking up this, maybe somebody who was really iconic recorded it in a certain way, and then all the rest of them are kind of paying tribute to that version, and then maybe another iconic version will come out where that's an even more different version of the second version that you hear, and then you hear people picking up on that. And now that you've listened to all of those different versions, you have the knowledge to be like, at a first listen, be like, oh, okay, well, they're not actually playing that original melody when you're hearing it this way. Oh, this is from this version when that person did it that way, and now everyone else is doing it like that. Yeah.
And you know what? Miles Davis was usually the guy who would influence everyone else with his melodies, because he would never, if you want to find the true melody of a song, don't go to Miles Davis. I hope I don't get in trouble for saying that. But, and I often talk about this with you, like Billie Holiday too. Now I don't doubt these great musicians didn't know the melody. I'm sure they knew the right melody, but they sure wouldn't play it. You know, they wouldn't sing, Billie wouldn't sing the original melody, and Miles wouldn't play the original melody. But that's a different thing than actually knowing where it comes from. And any great musician you talk to, they know the true melody. And then when you know it, you have the freedom to go away from it. But you can't be faking it. You can't be not knowing it and then going away and doing your own thing, and what we call faking it. I really think if you want to do the music justice, you have to do your homework. And there's a lot of homework to be done. So that's the other great thing about jazz, is like, you can do this stuff until you die, and there will still be, like, you're still only at the tip of the iceberg, right?
It's such a rich history and a rich music that one lifetime is not enough.
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to a podcast a few months ago of Chick Corea talking with Herbie Hancock, two of the greatest jazz musicians of all time. They're both in their 70s and 80s now. And Herbie, who's in his 80s, was saying in that podcast, he was saying to Chick, you know, man, like, I'm a student. I'm still a student, and I'm still learning new things. And I thought that's so nuts,
cool,
that this kind of godlike figure like Herbie Hancock is still considers himself a student. And yeah, so that's heavy.
So Anthony, we're about to show our audience a clip of you playing. Could you just maybe explain how that relates to what we're talking about?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm in this clip, I'm going to be playing a song written by Anne Rennell. It's called Willow Weep for Me. A really cool song. This one's unique because most of those standards were written by men, but this one in particular was written by a woman And I was just reading earlier today that Anne like went to George Gershwin and visited him when she was young, when she was a student at, I think she went to Stanford. And she went to him with this song, and Gershwin actually encouraged her to like go into songwriting and go into like working for Broadway. So she did just that, but definitely faced tons of challenges just because of being a woman in a male-dominated discipline way back in the 1930s. So she did have a couple hits, and one of them, her probably biggest one, was "Willow Weep for Me." So in this recording, what I did was I played it 2 times. The first pass, I played the original chord changes from the very original version, which was released in 1932, I think, 32 in December. And I kind of played in the same style, the old timey style they played it in. And then I did a second pass of it with all these additional reharmonizations or added chords that I've just kind of picked up from teachers or from these recordings, and just mixed everything together. Yeah. So first time through, original recording, then into the reharm, the more complex version.
Anthony and I always have so much to chat about. So if you'd like to check out that conversation in full, once again, you can click one of the links provided. Next up, you'll be hearing and seeing a snippet of the conversation that I had with jazz bassist Leighton McKinley Harrell. We talk about the history of jazz, and more specifically, the history of jazz upright bass. is a bassist and composer from Raleigh, North Carolina. He began his musical studies at 15. He has received a scholarship to attend the University of Toronto, where he is currently an undergraduate student. Upon moving to Toronto, he quickly established himself on the scene as a talented and dependable musician, comfortable in a number of musical settings. Leighton balances a busy schedule of gigs around the city with his studies, and since 2019 has held a bi-weekly residency at Poetry Jazz Cafe with his quartet. Leighton is currently a student of Andrew Downing and has studied with Dave Young, Rodney Whittaker, and Ben Wolfe, among others.
Okay, so before you mentioned playing the quarter note and having, kind of a percussive sound, which relates perfectly to the next question that I really wanted to ask you. And it's a bit of a kind of history question, I guess, in some ways, also a technique question. And as I was preparing for this interview with you, this conversation with you, I should say, I realized that I literally don't know the history of the upright bass in jazz at all. I'm like, where does it come from? Like, how did this happen? How did upright bass, become like this pinnacle of jazz music and the jazz ensemble? And where does this come from? And so upon doing some research, I learned that the role of the bass in New Orleans was originally played by the tuba or the sousaphone, which makes so much sense now that I think about it, in the brass bands and in marches and ragtime in Dixieland. And that only in the 1920s, jazz started going from these kind of marches and the brass band scene to an indoor bar, and at the time brothels is where people would actually play jazz indoors. And obviously the sousaphone and the tuba were too loud to play in these areas, and so they would play the upright bass, but pre-amplification, now the upright bass is too quiet. And so I didn't realize this. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. We need an amp, we need an amp to be able to hear the bass over the piano and over other people playing whatever. Mm-hmm. And what I learned is that this is where slap bass comes from, because you can hear the bass so much louder when you're doing the slap bass. And obviously there's that percussive element to playing bass if you're adding the slaps. And I'm just so curious to ask you about this, because I've heard and seen some slap bass going on. I don't hear it very much, but I do hear it in jazz. And I'm just wondering if you could tell me just a little bit about slap bass. Like, what is the function? Do you play slap bass? How come some people play it and some people don't in jazz right now? And
Yeah, sure. I think, you hit the nail right on the head when you said, originally, in, early jazz, in New Orleans, cats were playing with the sousaphone and, marching and doing that thing. And I think a lot of I think modern jazz bassists don't realize how much of a deep influence that has had on just the role of the bass in this music.
I know, I didn't know. I kind of thought they were separate things in a way, and I learned I couldn't be more wrong. Right,
they're super connected. Well, a lot of the old cats would play both because a lot of people still do. I don't play sousaphone, but a lot of the old cats would play upright bass, and they do the slapping thing. Then they'd play sousaphone if they had an outdoor gig. It just meant more work for them, I think. But I'm not I want to preface this by saying I'm not an expert. There are some cats that are really, really, really heavy into the slapping thing and really really know the whole history better than I do. But I think, I know enough. It really did start just kind of, I guess, as jazz was moving, I guess, north, into Chicago and New York and these areas. I don't think the kind of cultural context of the music was really these big parade style musical events, and I think it was a lot more clubs and a lot more kind of indoor venues, and that's when the upright started to come and play. But think about it, so we're talking about rhythm sections. You have the loudest instrument, the drums, right next to the quietest instrument, the bass. So that presents a problem very quickly about how the bass is going to be heard, because it's important that the bass is heard, right? So
we've established it's a very important role. We need to hear it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I guess the slapping thing was an answer kind of to that question. And well, one of the things that's interesting to me is the like most bass players play steel strings now. So it's like, you know, the core of the string is steel and then it's wrapped in more metal. Like back in the day, the common thing was to play gut strings. So they were like sheep gut or like they were like animal intestine. And some people still play them.
Whoa.
Still play these gut strings today, but the tension on them is actually the tension's like a lot looser, I guess, for lack of a better term. And so it doesn't damage your hands as much when you like, you know, so that's kind of like also part of what allowed for like slap bass to be just kind of so accessible, I guess, for lack of a better term. Because to learn to slap on steel strings is kind of painful, and like I do it sometimes if certain gigs call for it, but it takes a while to develop those calluses, and like I'm still not really super comfortable slapping on steel strings. And it was actually like something that like all bass players kind of learned. Like
that was going to be my follow-up question, Leighton, is do you think that someone who picks up jazz bass today should learn how to slap bass or not?
I think it's important. Like, I mean, I'm not like excellent at it. Like I'm not, I have some friends who are like really great at, like have gotten just like really, really deep into it. I'm not like a slap bass expert. I'm not excellent at it by any means, but I think that, yeah, like you should at least have like a working knowledge of like, or to me, I think that it's important to have like a working knowledge of that kind of like, because I think it's like, yeah, I think it's just so deeply important to kind of bridge that gap and recognize that the sousaphone to the slap bass to like the modern two-feel and beyond it's all super connected. You know, for example, like Paul Chambers on he's a bass player in the Miles Davis Quintet, the first great quintet. There's a beautiful example of this I was talking about with one of my teachers recently on the record Roundabout Midnight. And on the track Bye Bye Blackbird, Paul Chambers plays, I'm going to sing terribly, but he plays like, the bass line is a two-feel, so it's ding, dung, ding, ka-dung, gung, ging, gung, ging, gung, 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 or something like that, right? And that's like really important because like, so that's like a softened up version of like the New Orleans second line type bass line where it would be ding, dong, ding, dong, ding. You know what I mean? And it's like really like, that's like, okay, so we're 30 years later and in New York, and that's like what but it's lineage, right? It's like history. It's, you know, these things are really connected. And so I'm sure, I have no doubt that Paul Chambers, who is responsible for like kind of almost like the like one of the godfathers of like the modern two-feel as we call it in jazz, I'm sure that he knew how to play a slap bass line, you know what I mean? Because I just feel like that's kind of where that came from, and it kind of shaped the direction of where jazz bass has gone and continues to go. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, again, you're really setting me up for my questions here, Leighton. I have a very pertinent question to what you just said, and that is, I am really dying to know, how does, for you, in your opinion, how does the study of jazz tradition influence your playing today? How do you study early jazz music, and how do you apply or not apply that study to your contemporary jazz or modern popular music playing?
Sure. So I think, like, again, echoing the words of a mentor of mine, you know, to be a jazz musician, you have to be a historian. I think that, like, yeah, like it's really important. I spent a summer, like, really trying to dig in to, like, the Louis Armstrong records of the 1930s, like with the Hot Fives and Hot Sevens. There's this great, like, Spotify collection. It's a collection on Spotify, but it's just called like the Decca singles, and it's like all the singles Louis Armstrong put out on Decca.
Cool.
In like, I think there's a couple of them. There's like a couple volumes, but it's like between 1933, 1930, whatever, through the 40s. And I spent a summer, among other things, you know, I was practicing other things, but I was really trying to like just like get into that vibe and like and kind of feel how to play that. And I think that, like, more than most things I've done, has really helped kind of ground my understanding, not only of like the music from like a cultural and historical perspective, but also like, I think I might butcher it, but there's this quote I think about often where Branford Marsalis, or this story, he's talking about transcribing all these Wayne Shorter solos, and then talking about not getting it, and then he went back and transcribed like a bunch of Lester Young solos, who was like Wayne Shorter's hero, and then he was like, oh man, like this makes sense, like, wow. And I think I have that thing, or I've kind of found that the more, you know, I become aware of like the older jazz records, the more that everything else kind of makes sense. And so I think, like, you know, tradition is this thing, and with each generation we choose which things we're going to continue to uphold, and we also choose which things we're not going to kind of continue in the same way, right? And so I think, like, even though like most modern jazz bassists like aren't slapping the bass on every tune, I think we're still like deeply influenced by like what that kind of tradition of playing has brought to the music. You know, I think it's all really connected in ways that are probably deeper than I can understand at this point. You know, being like 21 years old and like still relatively new to this music, but I think that I apply it in some ways. I guess like in some ways like explicitly, in some ways implicitly, because I know that music. I know I've spent time with that music, and I think that's like the most important thing for me is like I'm not saying that musicians should play the way Louis Armstrong did on those records. I'm not saying that all bass players have to play the way that Slam Stewart did, or Israel Crosby or Willie Dixon, you know, but when you spend time like learning how those cats played, and Milt Hinton, and sorry, I'm just thinking of more names. It like really, I think it really like can inform and just kind of broaden your horizons in ways you wouldn't expect. And so I think it's like really important to me, to my personal jazz study, I guess, to dig into those older records and love them, because they're so like beautiful to me. It's just fun to listen to. So I don't know.
Yeah, because you play in so many different like ensembles. Like you play, you know, we've played together in like the Jazz United jam setting with dancers, swing dancers, tap dancers, and right. We play, you know, that kind of, you know, music. And I've also heard you play, I've also seen you play in like very contemporary kind of jazz, new jazz, hip hop kind right. of settings as well, all on the upright bass as well. And so, yeah, I guess, would you say that, you know, learning these roots is valuable even when you're playing music that seems kind of still jazz, but far from those root sounds?
I think so, because I think it's super important. And if you want to be like a jazz musician, I think it's really important to know the whole history. Yeah. Just like if you wanna be a funk musician, I think it's really important to learn that whole history too. If you want to be a hip hop musician, I think, you know, it's really like any kind of music you want to throw yourself into. I think it's really, 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 really important to start from the beginning and really just try to soak up as much information you can. And I think the most important thing that, like in American popular music and basically in North American music, I think the one kind of unifying factor is the blues. And I think that's like kind of the most important thing that anybody wanting to play American music, it doesn't matter if it's like I don't know, like folk, jazz, R&B, you know, hip hop, like any kind of music that you know, from the past 100 years at least, but probably more, that has its origin in North America. I think you can't disconnect that from the blues. Yeah, I mean, and that is, we have to also acknowledge that that's like a huge musical contribution by, you know, Black people who made this music in very hard conditions and under impossibly difficult conditions. in the United States. And I think that's kind of the common thread of like American music.
Leighton is such a force. If you'd like to hear the entire conversation in full, again, please do so by clicking the links provided. These conversations were so educational, uplifting, and energizing for me. I highly encourage you to look at the person next to you or to make a call and together discuss jazz. What does the jazz community that you know and love represent? How do you study jazz? How do you honor the jazz tradition? What do you think the future of jazz looks like? I would love it if everybody looked up their favorite jazz standard and did a little bit of research. When you figure out what it's about, if you find anything shocking or surprising or interesting about it, leave a comment below and share it with everybody. I'd love to open up the dialogue to having conversations about jazz, jazz history, and music at large. A very special shout out to North York Arts for having us, and for my guests, Travis Knights, Anthony D'Alessandro, and Leighton Harrell for opening up to me and sharing insights about their practice, their lives, and their visions for the future. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope that we get to perform for you soon. Bye!
Welcome to today, the first day of the rest of our lives. Leave your fear at the door. We don't need it anymore. What our fear takes a hold, and we feel our bodies take